Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another Sunday evening session with Brian and Janice. Today, we're going to bring you in on something that's really been hitting our nation pretty hard, especially since the pandemic. We're going to discuss mental health. I have a very dear passion for mental health. I was the director of the Gateway Psychiatric Unit in Bullock County for many years, at least 5 years. I was the director of mental health. So I have a close connection with mental health, and I understand the in-depthness of it, even though there are so many different aspects of mental health. But what I do realize is that a lot of us are not familiar with where this really originated from, especially in African Americans. Right now, we are going through times that are causing people to really feel very uneasy, a lot of sickness, a lot of disease. One thing that we're real concerned about, especially with COVID, once a person recovers from COVID, one of the things that we're seeing a lot of is that we're seeing that these people are really attacked neurologically. And that means they are suffering from anxiety, stress, depression. A lot of neurological impairments are taking effect after recovering from COVID, along with other aspects. And saying that, in dealing with what we're dealing with now in this pandemic, a lot of people are very stressed, especially African American, especially those of a lower socioeconomic income base, and even those that are a higher level that are not sure of where their job is going to take them from one day to the next. And we're seeing that in a vast array of people. So without further ado, I'm going to bring Brian to you and let him just give you the root of mental illness.
Good evening, Facebook family. Good evening, YouTube family. This is a very sensitive subject. One reason that it is so sensitive is because many Black people don't like to talk about mental illness.
No, they don't.
You being in that profession, having worked that profession for many, many years, it's a stigma attached, right?
Yes,
to,
it is.
to our mental health and the wellness of our mental health. So what we want to do is we definitely want to go back and trace some of the problem to its origin.
Inception.
To its origin. We want to look at the historical foundation of it as well. So what we'll do is we'll deal with that in phases as we talk about this subject. Like I said, it's a very sensitive subject. It's a subject that most people don't like to deal with,
Right.
but it's a very real subject in our community.
It is.
So I've always said, and I believe this, and I'm going to attempt tonight to actually show you this historically. Is that mental illness in the Black community is tied to slavery. And that is something that we never talk about, we never deal with. And when I say it's tied to slavery, we have to look at what happened to our foreparents.
Yes.
We have to look at what happened as it relates to the children of the foreparents and what is still happening. So we got to go back to great-great-grandmother.
Yes, we do.
And we got to understand the dynamic of what they had to deal with, and that's still being passed along today genetically through us in many ways, and as well as structurally it's still happening. So let me take you back. Let's walk back in history.
Okay.
Okay.
Take us there, Brian.
The first thing that we want to talk about is Dr. Benjamin Rush in the 1700s, who was also the Surgeon General at that time. He deals with or diagnoses the behavior of African people after the Revolutionary War. Now, keep in mind, this is 1700s. What he says about African people as it relates to their behavior and their mental status is that African people were prone to have outbursts just out of nowhere. He said that they were also very, what we would call today, depressed. Okay, they would get very down. He also stated that they suffered from a disease called nigritude.
Wow.
Okay, the actual diagnosis of nigritude means that black people would try to act like they were white people. In this mental status, he said that blacks would do anything to change their condition. And the quickest way to change their condition was by them trying to be white. So he labeled this disease as nigritude.
Wow.
Notice it has the suffix on it, tude,
Yes.
just as if you would have attitude, okay? So meaning the behavior of the Negro. So nigritude, part of that behavior of the Negro was that he would try to act black. I would try to act white.
Yeah.
Okay, so that dynamic with Dr. Rush, when he puts this out, when he writes the paper, his essay about this kind of put, okay, this, I'm sorry, we got interrupted there, but this kind of put black people on the map as it relates to mental illness. Now, let's fast forward. In the mid 1800s, in the 1840s, there was a doctor by the name of John Galt. John Galt refuted Dr. Rush's claim that black people could suffer from mental illness, and John Galt stated that black people were immune from mental diseases. The reason that he stated that black people were immune from mental diseases was because he said that only people that suffered from, only people that had to deal with capitalism and had to deal with the act of commerce would be up under such stress that they would have mental issues. And because the black person did not have to deal with commerce, did not have to deal with capitalism, that there was no way that they could actually suffer
From stress.
from mental illness, which caused stress. Okay, so John Galt refutes in the mid 1840s the claims of Dr. Rush. Now, fast forward, let's move from that point. Okay, moving from Dr. John Galt, we see another dynamic prevails in slavery. And that dynamic takes place from a standpoint of other physicians coming behind John Galt. One physician in Louisiana, the other in Georgia. Both of these were psychiatric doctors. This was in the 1870s. They also state that they did not feel that the possibility of a slave really suffering from mental sickness was true. But if in fact a slave could suffer from a status of mental illness, then the best way to deal with that was to beat the slave until his condition changed.
Wow.
Okay, so not factoring in all of this going on, never factoring in the socioeconomic status of the slave, never factoring in the condition of the slave, never factoring in the treatment of the slave, never factoring in, like I said, the economic position of the slave. None of those things were considered. So the trauma that we dealt with and that our ancestors dealt with, when I say we, as slaves, has been genetically passed down and structurally passed down to us. When we say structurally passed down, I'm talking about through the system, meaning that the system has not changed as it relates to how we are labeled and how we are viewed in society. So a lot of the mental suffering that we have to deal with and that we go through, family,
Yes.
is based on how we are still viewed in society, how we are received and not received in society, how we are as far as being labeled, how we are categorized, how we are actually labeled, how we are stereotyped. A lot of that, apart from dealing with the other factors, such as poverty,
Yes.
okay, such as police brutality,
Yes.
such as miseducation,
Yes.
all of those other factors that we also have to deal with, that's piled on top of the fact that we are labeled in society as an inferior race that cannot produce and cannot perform up to the standard that the European has set in this country, produces mental illnesses that causes the body to go into a state of shock.
Yes.
From that state of shock, what is produced is hypertension,
Yes.
diabetes,
Yes.
strokes, all type of different ailments that we
Obesity.
suffer, obesity,
Yes.
that we
Yes.
suffer from based off of our mental status in this country and what has been passed down for at least 2 to 3 generations, at least 2 to 3 centuries. We have been suffering from this, or what we call mental illness. So let's look at the trauma of mental illness. And let me, if I can, try to give you some examples of mental illness. One example I want to share is we are always told, Black people that is, that we have to work harder than anyone else to get ahead. Okay? That is a mental sickness. What do you mean, Brian? Whenever we accept the fact that we have to outperform our counterpart who has the same education level or lower education level, then we have at that point agreed with our oppressor that we are marginal at best and inferior to the one that we have to work harder to achieve the same level of success or to achieve the same level of status that they have in order to be accepted. That is a mental condition that we have told, we suffer from, and that we have told ourselves that now that I cannot perform at this status without having to do twice as much. Why is that? Because society says that in order for the Black to achieve what their counterparts have achieved, they have to work twice as hard because society automatically looks down on them. Because society automatically has stereotyped that they are inferior intellectually, that they are slothful and lazy, and they cannot perform up to the same standards as those that are normal people.
Yes. Oh.
Okay, so that within itself, and I've always said this, every Black person that exists today suffer from some forms
Of mental illness.
of mental illness. Okay, let's look at another example. So if you have in the past said that I had to work harder, that you have in some form been brainwashed to the point of believing that you are marginal in some sense, even if you may not be. Okay, you have accepted that fact. To accept something that you are not is a form of a mental sickness.
Yes, exactly.
It is a breakdown that happens.
Yes.
Okay, so that's where, from a standpoint of origin, that's where all mental illnesses start from. It starts from, okay, accepting what the oppressor says about you and agreeing with how the oppressor treats you as it relates to how you function in this society. So I can't do anything in this society without the acceptance of the oppressor. And how the oppressor tells me to do it is how I must do it in order for it to be the right way. Okay? That is a breakdown. That is a subtle way of programming our minds to act a certain way, to think a certain way. Okay? And if we don't perform in those particular fashions that they have created for us to perform in, then we start to go into what I call and counselors call a state of repression. Now, we're not talking about the traumas that go on in families yet. We're not talking about some people having been child molested. We're not talking about growing up so poor that you can't even afford a different meal throughout the week and every night. I don't know if some people may be watching, but I remember when I was growing up, 2-3 nights a week, we would have chicken and rice. Okay? Didn't know we were poor, but we were poor. Okay? So not dealing with the trauma of being in poverty, growing up as a child in poverty. Okay? Not dealing with the trauma of may not have had a father in the home. Okay? Not dealing with the trauma one of your family members may have been murdered or killed. Not dealing with the trauma that you may have had a great-great-granddad that was hanged, that the great-great-grandmother never talked about. So you got so many different variations of trauma that all stem from how the European shaped the society for us to exist in. And the Europeans shaped the society so that we would always be marginalized and dehumanized, so that we will always live up under the scrutiny of how they view us. And unfortunately, when we look at all of these different dynamics of trauma, you can trace them all back to the condition that we existed in slavery.
Yes.
See,
yes.
We can trace the father not being in the home back to them dividing the families.
Yes.
Understand what I'm saying? We can trace seeing a loved one killed and murdered now by the police, by loved ones being hanged by the KKK.
Yes.
From 1890 to about 1930s. Okay, more hangings within that time frame after Reconstruction than ever in U.S. history. So we could trace all of these mental sicknesses back to the creation of the plantation, the creation of this country that we were placed in and stated that this is how you exist, this is how you coexist with us. Okay, so we could trace all of these things back to that, being called lazy and not living up to par and being up to standard. All of that could be traced back to the plantation, when the slave master says, no, now you've been punished. You got to pick 200 pounds of cotton today instead of 100 pounds. Okay? Wow. Or that you lazy because you're not picking as much cotton regardless of you being sick. You understand what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. You could have had some many things going on. But the slave master says, no, they were lazy. They didn't pick enough cotton today. Okay, so put them back out in the field. See, all of these different traumas that we are experiencing now systematically, we're not in chains anymore, but we're still in the same governmental system that constructed how we function and how we act in society, that put us on the bottom and made us a labor class force that would never achieve the same status as our counterpart. So all of that, we have to look at all of that. So when we deal with mental illnesses in our community. And like I said, a lot of black people, even when you come up into I was talking about from 1890s to about the 1930s, you had more hangings in the U.S. than any other period. Also, listen, this is something else that's very powerful. When you talk about mental sickness, we talk about the medical malpractice when it comes to black people, and black people not trusting medical professionals.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
That's right.
In the 1920s, what comes over here from Great Britain is called eugenics. What was eugenics? Okay. Eugenics was stated that if you were a woman that could produce good stock, you were allowed to have children. Now, I'm putting this in practical terms. If you were a woman that were considered to have mental issues, or if you were a woman that considered to suffer from some type of behavioral problems, and you could possibly produce a child that would have those same dysfunctions, then you were a prime candidate for sterilization. So there were more black women from the mid 1920s, even into Alabama, even into the 1970s, still in Alabama, that were being sterilized because they were being diagnosed with mental illnesses and were not allowed to have babies, because those babies would be the lowest in society and not able to function, and a burden on society. Okay? So the whole concept of eugenics was to wipe out a particular group of people that was labeled as having behavioral problems. Now, let's go back. If I can go back. When we look at the early 1700s, 1800s, like I was talking about, there are certain things that the slave master and those so-called psychiatric doctors at that time called black people. Okay? One of those things that they called us was hyperactive. Have you heard that term today?
Yes, many times.
Okay. Our children are labeled today as having hyperactive disorders. That is an old term pulled out of the playbook of the racists that labeled black folks to say that we had some type of behavioral dysfunctions. Okay. Many times the way that they corrected those behavioral dysfunctions was how, unfortunately, parents correct the behavioral dysfunction that they have been told their child have today by beating them or whipping them until the hyperactivity subsides, until they literally cannot do anything, don't have strength enough to hold their heads up. So we have repeated and we repeat the same cycle of what the slave master did to us on our children. Okay, let's go a little bit further. Okay. Also, black people, how we treat each other, as it relates to our interaction.
Yes. Yes.
As it relates to our support of one another. Mm-hmm. Black people are very jealous of one another. Okay. Now, I can talk about some different names as far as the diseases. Okay. One of the names is dysesthesia. We talk about this, Ethiopia. which means that was a diagnosis in the mid 1800s by many so-called psychiatrists. Dysesthesia Ethiopia was termed as black dullness. Notice it has the word Ethiopia in it. The word Ethiopia from the Greek actually means black skin or people of the sun. Mm-hmm. Those that have dark faces, okay? So there are many definitions that all say the same thing. But dysesthesia referred to black dullness, talking about mental dullness. And in that mental dullness, black people would turn against each other. Black people would get jealous of one another. If you had the field person out in the field working and the house Negro in the house, the black person in the field
was jealous of the one in the house.
Would get upset after having worked all day in the field and felt like the Negro in the house had it easier. So those tensions would arise as it relates to, you got it better than I have. So a form of jealousy would begin to take place.
Come up.
Yes, and fester in the minds of the slaves. What they did not understand is it doesn't matter where you're at. If you're still up under the whip of the oppressor, okay, your conditions is very likely to be similar, just on a different context, okay? Because now the person in the house, the slave in the house, had to deal with the whip of the mistresses and the mistresses' children, belittling them, talking about them, using them. Okay, no different from having to work in the field for 8 hours in the hot heat. Still, either way, the dynamics is producing an individual that's still going through mentally, structurally, and conditionally the same thing. Okay, just in different contexts. So like I said, okay. So when we look at that, and there again, that doctor suggests that the best way to deal with that, beat the slave. Beat the slave. Okay, so all of these traumas, they're very, very real that we deal with in our community. Some of the ways that we try to, as far as going through it the best way that we can, some of the ways that we try to cope with it is by way of marijuana, alcohol, okay? Some it may be crack cocaine. Some it may be large amounts of sugar, food. These are different ways that we deal with and that we cope with mental sicknesses, okay? And a lot of times we go overboard. We see our young people go overboard with the marijuana and things of that, and the alcohol, things of that nature. But they're trying to cope as best as they can, just like we all are, okay? And then we have a problem with trusting, like I said, physicians. Because the first thing that they want to do is prescribe medications. They want to prescribe those downers, I guess. So what are some of the medications?
Well,
psychiatric medications.
Psych drugs, sedatives, hypnotics.
Yes.
Antidepressants.
So, and I will say this. There needs to be alternative methods of treatment. Because if you only can treat mental behavior with psychotic drugs, then the addiction part is very real.
Yes, it is.
And that could also be something that the individual feels like gets a point in this, like feel like they cannot live without. And
Exactly.
and they form another addiction on top of what they're already having to deal with and the stress of just trying to live. Now they have to also combat having an addiction to a psychotic
And Brian,
medicine. So
I don't mean to interject, but what happens, they become dependent on that drug, and when they can no longer get that medication, then you have a compoundment. Not only have they not dealt with the reasoning behind them having the medication or the anti-anxiety or antidepressant drug, but the underlying condition is still there and it's festering, and the medication covers it up. Now, I don't doubt that there are some people out there that truly need medicine for a specific time. The loss of a child, the loss of a mother, that could be very traumatic to some people. And at that time, they cannot handle everything that's coming at them. So you might need something to help calm you down or to help you sleep, because most people don't sleep. We're seeing a lot of that with COVID. In fact, there's another diagnosis out with COVID. It's called corona insomnia. COVID insomnia, meaning now people that have recovered from COVID having problems sleeping. I mean, how can you function if you can't sleep? And it's not that they've done anything, but they've encountered the dreadful disease that has attacked the neurological system, and they cannot sleep. So we're giving them medication to cause them to sleep. So there's a lot of factors in there, and those are some of the things that we're dealing with.
In 1895, the diagnosis of insanity as it relates to Black people was described as a person having uncontrollable appetites, a person that was hypersexual, and a person that could not control their emotions. Okay, that was the definition of insanity as it relates to mental sicknesses concerning the Black people in 1895. Okay, so the continuing and furthering of labeling us. So if they could put a title on what it is that they feel that you are, then it always places you in a category of being inferior. Okay? So here's the concept behind that. The concept is that that no one of a Black color, based on the slave master, was superior to their counterparts. So how do you continue to make you inferior? You label them, you stereotype them, okay? You continue to say that they are certain things, even when you know they're not. So the whole concept of programming our minds to think a certain way so that our bodies would act a certain way was put in place. So when he gave the definition of insanity, it was based off of what they forced the slaves to do. Okay? Hypersexuality came out of the concept in the mind of the European, looking at the African and saying that the African, because of certain features of the African, he must be and she must be. Okay? People that participate in sexual acts, lewd sexual acts, perversion, that came out of their mind because of jealousy. You understand? So even now, when Europeans look at Black women and Europeans look at Black men, they think automatically that is a hypersexual person. They see black people as sexual objects, so to speak. Okay. Now we can go back to the whole concept of the genitalias and how white men, that's why when they would hang black men, they would cut off their genitalias, put them in jars, put them over fireplaces. With the black women's, they would castrate the black women's, cut their breast off, things of that nature. All of this to promote what they labeled us as. Okay, so when we start dealing with mental issues, we have to realize and recognize that we cannot be perpetrators of our own demise. And what do I mean when I say perpetrators of our own demise? We have to at some point stop participating in what they say we are. Do you understand? So we have to stop advertising our bodies as sex objects.
Yes.
Let's make it simple for you so
Just
you'll
keep it
understand.
simple. Yes.
We have to stop, our men have to stop chasing after every woman that comes along. We have to stop perpetrating our own demise. At some point, we have to also become accountable. Now, let me say this. The black church was a very positive institution as it relates to helping us sort through and deal with some of these mental issues that we face on a daily basis.
Yes, yes.
Okay? A lot of them not our fault because the system was structured so that we would develop these type of mental issues, these mental breakdowns. Okay? The whole terminology of, and we were talking about this earlier, going into a fit. When you see children in Walmart,
Yes.
and they'll just fall out in the middle of the floor.
Because they can't get what they want.
Because they can't get what they want there. And the first thing that comes out the parent's mouth, okay, boy, you better stop acting like, boy, you better stop acting. You better stop having a fit. That stems back to slavery. When a slave was beaten to the point of exhaustion, a lot of times their body would begin to excrete. They would begin to foam.
Yes.
At the mouth, they would begin to convulse, and the slave master would say they're having a fit. Some of it was even having seizures, and they did not know what to call it. The Europeans at that particular time,
so they called it fits.
They called it fits. So we still say the same thing today about our children. So these things that we deal with, we suffer from mental sickness on a level that is far beyond what our counterparts will ever suffer from. So that's why in our community, like I said, the black church has been a positive institution in helping us to deal with some of those things, but it is also, by the same token, hurt us. Because when you have leaders that tell you to pray away your depression, and you continue to sink deeper and deeper into the depression, that produces, another attitude within us that says that if the church can't help me, and if God's not listening, then why am I here?
Yes.
Now it causes us to question.
Yes.
Okay. Does God really exist? Okay. So as instrumental as the church has been, it has also been detrimental in a lot of cases. There are some things you cannot pray away. There are some things that we got to learn that laying hands on and all of these other things are just symbolic in nature. They are not meant to deal with some of the psychosis that are triggered in us, which have existed for 3, 4, 5 generations and been passed down. Okay, so we have to, that's why it's important for us to go back and really begin to pinpoint where the source of this stems from. Why do we still have mental breakdowns? Why is the trauma in our families and in our communities escalated to the point of now black children from the ages of 5 to 11 commits suicide on a larger scale than any other group of children in the world? Why is that? At one time, that was unheard of. 80% of black men today have attempted suicide. 80%. At one time, that was unheard of. Okay, so we have to go back to the source and start looking at, where did this all come from? Why do I act the way I act? Why do I talk the way I talk? Why do I say certain words to my children? Why do I repeat when the school tells me that my child is ADD? Why do I repeat that? Oh boy, you ADD, sit down, shut up. Why do I talk like the system that was put in place to keep him uneducated? You understand what I'm saying? Why do I call my children bad? So we have to go back and understand
words
and the psychosis of what has happened to us. Why is it that I look at one of my sisters or my brothers on the street and then label them gangster and thug and B and W? You see what I'm saying? For our women. Why is it? See, the psychosis that we deal with by way of propaganda, by way of subtle stereotyping and labeling us, is still in place, and it is more prevalent today than it has ever been. All of that stems from a constructed system that was put in place to continue to marginalize the slave, to marginalize the slave descendants, to dehumanize them, and to make them into what they have always said. And that is the lowest being in this planet, not worthy of being able to exist and coexist in society with other groups.
Okay. Brian,
so we have to deal with those things.
Brian, and our young girls now, they are actually emulating that lifestyle. They feel that is acceptable. That is the only way to get attention. That is the only way that makes them feel worthy. They feel that builds their self-esteem. They're really into the Cardi B's, the WAP. Well, that.
So let's talk about that. Stockholm Syndrome. You've ever heard of Stockholm Syndrome? Okay. Stockholm Syndrome is when the captured agrees with his captor. When he agrees with his abuse, when he agrees with his methods, when he agrees with his ideologies. Okay. So our young people are literally, and especially some of our women, are suffering from a form of Stockholm disease. See, we agree with what the oppressor says we are. When our women degrade themselves by becoming no more than sex objects and putting all of their body parts on display for the whole world to see, with no shame, with no type of, well, let me rephrase that and not say shame, but without dignity and without respect for themselves, then they have accepted the narrative of what the counterpart says about them. You understand what I'm saying? Says that they're hypersexual beings anyway. They act like that anyway. They act like thugs and uncivilized people. This is how they are. Now, I said this, with these type of dysfunctions and mental sicknesses in our community, it touches us all. Okay? We all suffer from some variation of mental sickness. It takes Defragging, it takes deprogramming your mind. I've always said this: the most intelligent person is a person that can keep silent when they don't know about something. Sometimes Black people, we just talk so we can hear ourselves. So we'll repeat anything that's being said about us. Once that goes out, once those words hit the air, then they have power to not only shape your world, but to shape your immediate surroundings and environment and existence in that environment. Okay? So what we have to understand, see, we're talking about the power of magic as it relates to mental illnesses and mental sicknesses and mental breakdowns and the traumas that we've experienced in our communities, our families. So we're talking about centuries of these people speaking, okay? And us starting to receive, believe. That's where the concept of name it, claim it, blab it, grab it, speak it, receive it comes from. Okay? It comes out of a slave system because we did not understand what I call the magic or the power of words. Okay? So what the counterpart did was speak into existence. Here are people that came from the most highly advanced civilizations the world had ever known. African people that had created the pyramids, African people that had created such great civilizations and marvels, wondrous marvels that still exist to this day, that people cannot explain how they were done. Coming to this country, being subjected to such terror and such torture and such vehement, constant speaking of and degrading of who we were, that the narrative began to change. We began to accept the narrative in reverse of who we were. So we still see that today with mental sicknesses. Depression is a real thing.
Yes, it is.
Anxiety is a real thing.
It's real.
Okay?
Yes.
When you don't know where your next meal is coming from,
that's real.
Anxiety is real.
Yes, it
when
is.
you don't know if you're going to have a job today or tomorrow,
that's real.
It's real.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
When you lose a loved one, a mother, a father, a sister,
child.
a brother, depression is real. We have to know how to deal with these things. We have to understand the trauma so that we can process it through outlets other than medication.
Yes, Brian.
Okay, so we have to learn how to breathe. We have to learn how to meditate again. So we're talking about things. If you don't meditate, you need to start. I always say that it's a moment, even if you just 10 minutes a day, where you take time and unplug your mind from all devices, all technology, to where you cut everything off and you sit still and practice clearing your mind. That is a necessity. And we have the opportunity now with the pandemic being here and people being isolated in their homes. If you don't have a hobby, take up a hobby. Biking, running, walking. Begin to do some of these things as a form of mental wellness. Okay? As a form of rebooting yourself, so to speak, as a form of taking care of your psyche. When we do that, it allows healing to take place.
Yes.
It allows us to deal with some of those bad traumas that we've had in our life, and it allows us to process it. It allows us to begin to take an introspective of who we are and what happened to us. And from that point, the healing can start.
Yes.
But we have to look within.
We have to look within.
You understand? So
Yes.
in order to deal with those particular traumas.
Yes.
Okay. So I want to give you some stats and then we'll get ready to end up.
Okay.
Okay. So 19.1% of all African American adults in some form suffers from anxiety disorders. 19.1%. And these stats that I'm giving you are off of the NAMI website, okay, which stands for the National Association of Mental Illness. Okay, you can look this up for yourselves. 70% of youth that are in juvenile detention facilities suffer from or have been diagnosed with mental illnesses. Okay, 37% of incarcerated African American males and females have been diagnosed with anxiety or depression. Okay, 41% of veterans.
Yes.
Okay,
that's a high number.
And then, like I said, 80% of African American males have attempted suicide between the years of 2015 up to this point.
What's that stat on military veterans?
41% of veterans are diagnosed with some form of mental illness. So it's very real, family. It's very real in our community. We have to deal with it. But I want you to understand the origin of where some of these things stem from. Like I said, we have to go back. We have to look at the conditions that our foreparents existed under and how those same conditions have been passed down to us by way of the system. Okay? So only difference is, like I said, we're not in chains.
No.
But we still deal with some of the same terroristic conditions that our foreparents dealt with that is taking a toll on our community.
It is.
So,
and Brian, another thing we tend to look at, the African American community suffers from a lot of physical ailments such as hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, multiple diseases that African Americans suffer with. And on top of that, then you compile, they get depressed, they get anxious.
So what majority of the medical ailments that you just named are a byproduct of mental disorders that causes the body to go into shock, which we call stress. Okay? Yes. So the diseases that you just identified with are predominantly in the African American community.
Exactly.
Okay?
Yes.
They exist there because we're suffering from the depression, we're suffering from the anxiety, we're suffering from
PTSD.
PTSD. Yes, absolutely. How to live. And those different traumas produces, like I said, the body to go into a state of shock, literally trying to fix itself. That stress is the body going into shock.
Exactly.
Okay?
That's exactly what it is.
That's what stress is.
That's
okay?
it.
And then it produces those other ailments.
It does.
Okay. So we have to go back and look at what put us in the condition to where our bodies were constantly
at a state of
that's
stress.
Right. Yes, going into shock repetitively. And see, that has been passed down genetically. So that's why in the medical field, you all say that some things are genetic. Hypertension is genetic. Well, and I've argued with you on
yes,
this.
You have.
I don't believe that it's genetic. I believe there's a form of hereditary.
Right.
But it cannot be genetic. So it was passed down through another vehicle structurally through our DNA. So the structure in the system that was set up as it relates to how our foreparents were treated and how we are treated today
Yes.
is what causes us to produce the same ailments that began to show up in our foreparents.
The diseases.
That's right.
As you
That's
call
right.
them,
So that's right. The
diseases.
diseases. Right.
Wow.
So we have to recognize that. Okay. Passing down high blood pressure. Come on now. You understand? And I understand the dynamic of the medical, but when you put a person in a condition to where they cannot function, or in an environment where they cannot function, or they're constantly, body is going into shock because they're stressed, it's going to produce the same. You understand what I'm
Yes,
saying?
it is.
That mama and daddy had. Okay.
I see it every day, Barb.
So
every day.
There are some,
Every day.
and I'm not the medical professional here, she is, but we have
It's true.
large debates about this.
We do.
And there are many books written about this. There's a good book called The Wretched of the Earth. Francis Fanon, he actually does one whole chapter on mental illness and war. But what he says is that the slave was at war with the European. He based it off of the Algerian colonial war. And he said when the slave was at war, his body began to produce all type of diseases. Guess what one of the diseases were in the young men that were in their early 20s? Impotence.
I figured. Impotence. Okay. Yes.
Stress produced impotence. It produced women to be sterile. There was a lot of things. It produced fibroids. Now, in his study, he says that the African, in trying to function and survive, he was literally at war to just try to live. And being at war with the colonial system and the colonial slave master caused his body and his mind to break down. So he identifies that when Africans first started, when mental sicknesses and mental breakdowns first started, it started back with the colonialists coming in and interrupting our way of life. Okay, so whenever you're forced to live a certain way and live in a certain system, it is going to produce mental trauma, whether you want it to or not.
When you're taken out of what you're accustomed to.
Right. Well, and even now,
yes.
You're still trying to exist in a system that is a colonial system. What we have to understand is that this America that has been formed with you as the experiment. And you have never come off of the experimental table. You are still a subject in this America.
That's right.
That is being operated on every day.
Every day.
To find out what you can tolerate, what you can't tolerate, to find out how you react to certain things, how you don't react to certain things. You are a subject in this America.
Come on now.
And you cannot exist unless you exist the way they tell you to exist, to exemplify a certain level of civility.
Wow.
So they said that if you are going to be adopted into our society, okay, into our country,
yes, then
we have to systematically re-engineer the way you think. So that's why, okay, the good doctor, Benjamin Rush, comes up with the word nigritude. Black people that want to act white.
Wow.
Okay, so that's where that whole theory comes from. So if you're going to structurally exist in our society, you've got to
act like we act.
That's right. And that's why that's the early stages of what we see as known as the bourgeoisie.
That's it.
Okay. A black mind that has been contaminated by white education to the point to where they cannot deprogram themselves.
Come on, man.
To the point to where they continue to perpetrate the whiteness that has been inundated into their minds, that have been inoculated into their minds. And it is so deep that they cannot break away from it. That's why you can have people that have a master's degree, 2-3 doctorate degrees.
Yeah.
Okay. And they are of no service to their community.
None whatsoever.
Why? Because they are black-faced with a white mind. I said this
the other week.
That's
yes.
right.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So it is a form, though, of mental programming.
Yeah. As Phyllis says, they want to play the game.
That's exactly
Play
right.
the game.
It is a form, and guess what? It is a mental sickness.
Yes.
That our brothers and sisters actually are exemplifying. So that's why I said there is not one black person that exists today that does not suffer from some form of mental sickness.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That is also a form of mental sickness. When we accept a particular culture and refuse to learn our own, okay, and we feel like, and this is the question that should arise that they repress. The question should arise, where am I from? What are my origins? Where did I come from? See, when you are programmed to the point to where you act white, those questions you suppress within yourself.
Yes, you do.
Okay?
Yes.
You don't want to deal with those questions.
No.
Because now you got to look in the mirror and see that even though you may have a white mind and been educated at a white institution,
you're still black.
That's right, because we talked about this last week with HBCUs. 90% of the HBCUs were founded by European people.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
And guess what? The subject matters that are studied in HBCUs are European subject matters. There's only 5 to 10% of HBCUs that actually have an African Studies department. Okay, so and even the African Studies department are not taught by African professors. So it's a sad commentary.
Yes,
it really is.
Wow.
That's why we have to break away and begin to, like I said, deprogram ourselves.
It's like you always tell us, Brian. Everybody has their culture and they stick with their culture. Mm-hmm. You got people from other countries that come to the United States that still keep their culture.
Absolutely.
The Koreans, even the Mexicans, they don't mix with.
Yeah, you look at how many cities have Chinatowns. San Francisco, New York. I can go on and on.
Yes, yes.
You even got a Chinatown in Disney World.
You sure do.
So,
yes.
It's common sense. How does a people survive? A people survive by staying with their culture.
Their culture.
Okay? Those people groups that you just named, they value their history.
They do.
Okay?
They value and they know it.
And they know their history. And it is a prerequisite that all children have to learn their history. Except African people.
My goodness.
But that is part of the mental sicknesses that we suffer from. Okay? That is straight out of the playbook of the 1700s, early 1800s, the so-called European intellectuals of the day that labeled black people, that began to pass their programs from plantation to plantation. It is also a form of what we know as the Great Awakening Society.
Yes.
With the missionaries receiving much of the literary work of the white intellectuals at that time, and the Quakers, the Puritans, all of these different missionary groups, the Catholic mission societies, all of them came for one reason and one reason only, and that was to actually program the mind of the African to act white. So the mental games have been played on us since the inception of this country. So mental sickness in our community is always going to be escalated beyond other communities because of the trauma that has been placed upon us, okay? And because of the condition that we had to survive in, that no other people on the face of this planet
none
have had to deal with. So we are suffering from those same, like I said, same traumas, just in different contexts. We deal with it systematically now. Okay, we deal with it structurally now. But the result is the same.
It's the same.
Okay, so
It's the same.
I encourage you all as we wrap up today to look at outlets.
Yes.
Look at outlets. Begin to, if you're not talking, talk to yourself. It's good therapy.
Yes, it is. Just don't answer yourself.
Look in the mirror and begin to dialogue.
Yes.
Begin to talk about some of the hurt. If you've had some hurt, if you don't want to share it with someone else that's close to you, it's therapeutic.
Yes.
To express it, get it out in the air so that healing can start.
Yes.
Those repressed memories.
Yes.
You've got to look deep within and start dealing with some of those repressed memories if you're going to get better.
Yes.
If you continue to repress it, every time you're triggered and one of those memories come up,
It's gonna.
all it does is
stress.
produces hurt.
Yes.
Okay?
And stress,
more
stress,
and it just piles pain on top of pain.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does.
So
and then write your
stop.
little, your little mindfulness notes.
Yeah. Writing notes are always good to remind yourself of who you are.
Every day you read
Okay,
those
and repeat
notes.
to yourself who you are. So once you begin to call yourself a queen and a king, and once you begin to declare that you are not what the Europeans said you are, that you are not what your oppressors said you are the pride of the earth. You are a person of character, dignity, morality. You began at that moment to reverse the power and the magic that was placed on you 300 years ago.
Yes.
400 years ago. You understand what I'm
Yes.
saying? But we have to begin to say those things.
Yes, we do.
Okay. So, all right, we'll stop there.
Yes. Oh, it's been great, you guys. We love you. Have a wonderful, safe, blessed week. Have a happy, happy Thanksgiving and be safe. And remember, breathe nobody's air but your own. Have a good week. Love you guys. Happy Thanksgiving.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.